In part 2 of making a wobble-based synth, we're going to use incoming MIDI note velocity to create an envelope for our synth. Drag the patch you saved from part 1 of making a wobble-based synth into a new track and open it for editing. Let's try turning the notes on and off by inserting a gate tilde object between the rectangle and the live.gain objects. Create a live.toggle object. Connect the velocity outlet of note in to the toggle object and connect the outlet of the toggle to the left inlet of the gate object. Connect the outlet of the rectangle object to the right inlet of the gate object. Connect the outlet of the gate object to the inlet of the live.gain object. When we save it and play it, we get separate notes, but the beginning and ends of each note are glitchy. That's because this code is creating a full-sized rectangle envelope, which has the same amplitude for every note. Let's refine this envelope. Delete the gate object and replace it with a multiplied tilde object. Taking the velocity output of note in, we use a divide object to divide the MIDI velocity by 127. Don't forget the decimal point. Now the note on velocities are scaled to go from 0 to 1, and the note offs are 0. We're going to send these values into an ADSR tilde object, which produces a standard ADSR envelope with the default value set by its 4 arguments: 30 milliseconds attack, 10 milliseconds decay, sustain set to 70%, and a 300 millisecond release. This object produces a signal whose value is the gain, which is multiplied by the oscillator's signal using the multiply object. So that we can control and automate ADSR within Live, we're going to add 4 live.dials connected to the corresponding 4 inputs on the ADSR object. Note that when we hover the cursor over the ADSR object's second inlet, a pop-up text reminds us that this is the inlet for attack. We select the live.dial, call up the inspector and make a few changes to its default value. We set the name to attack, the range to 500, and the initial value to 20 milliseconds. Check the initial enable box. This means the initial value will be sent as a default when we first load the device. Continue with the others. Let's set the decay to 20 milliseconds. The sustain to 0.70, change the unit style to float, and the release to 300 milliseconds. Set the range for the decay from 0 to 500, set the sustain from 0 to 1, and set the release from 0 to 1000. While in the inspector, change the 4 live.dial short and long names, decay, sustain, and release to match their actions. Select all of the dials and add them to presentation. Enter presentation mode and move the dials to where you would like to see them in Live by default. Now we have actual notes with ADSR control. In the next video, we're going to add the synced filter to get that classic wobble-based sound.
Oh.